Taylor's book is just makes such a beautiful argument about how we completely underestimated the class of creators and influencers that built the internet into what it is today. With so many of our stories that we tell about digital culture are focused on the leaders of these companies, but really it's the people who have charted their careers, become individual creators that have made such a difference and really affected our entire economy, our whole lives, in ways that even if you are not a big social media user, like you will internalize and understand. And then Walter's book talks about how movies and TV, like the traditional media, like whether it's like a superhero movie or a war movie, like has changed, everything from what we think about our world to what professions we choose to what kind of chemicals emit from our bodies when we breathe. And Walter will tell you more about that. And there was like this one little section of his book that was like, and I looked into the internet and digital creators and didn't find that much that was statistically significant. I was like, okay, I need to get these two in a room. So without further ado, I will let them sort of give their opening statements. Let's start.
Okay. Hi, my name is Walt Hickey. I am a data journalist by trade predominantly. So a lot of the work that I've done has tried to use data, statistics, and numbers to help define and understand our world and see what stories emerge from it. I was at 538 for a few years as the pop culture writer, and I kept on finding a story that was bigger than anything that I had been doing. I had talked to a lot of people who were working on issues of representation. I had talked to a lot of people who just had a robust relationship with movies. And time again, I would find out that a movie changed their life in some way. A movie was found to have provoked people to go into STEM fields when they didn't think that women could go into STEM fields. You had things like the Scully effect. You had things like Katniss Everdeen causing USA Archery to see an influx of girls into their sport. In a sport that had professionally been usually defined by guys who went bow hunting. That's who went pro. And so there was just a lot of emerging evidence that this stuff makes a dent. And I wanted to figure that out. And what I found was bigger than anything that I really anticipated. There's reverberations across everything from geopolitics to your individual psychology to your individual physiology. And the book is just kind of a top to bottom look into that. And I really think that not only do we underestimate how much pop culture affects us, but I think that it's really important to hone in on why it affects us. And it's these long-term stories that resonate with us and cause long-term effects. And what I contend is that digital culture ain't there yet, sister. I think that we're seeing the long-term important effects of digital culture and connecting with viewers in totally fascinating ways. But I think that you really can't not yet come up against what pop culture can do for folks and how pop culture can change the world.
Taylor.
Yeah, obviously I disagree a little bit. Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, your book is so good because it really does show the effects of these, like, there are these real world impacts that I think are so interesting, and it did make me start to think of, like, what are those examples for the internet? I would argue it also shapes geopolitics and pop culture. I mean, so we were talking about earlier, that's like, when I say pop culture, I'm thinking internet culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my book talks a lot about kind of this content creator ecosystem and frankly its effect on the tech landscape and how it's shaped tech products and shapes human communication. So I do think it's completely transformed like everything that we know and the ways that we consume media and stuff. I guess what I had a harder time thinking of is like I guess you were saying these like real world things, and I actually thought of Sarah's book, which is so great, No Filter, great book on Instagram, because you talk a lot about the physical, like the Instagram walls and like the physical manifestations of kind of this creator culture, frankly, that emerged on Instagram. It's not the same as archery and stuff, but I do think that like there, the way that I mean, even Kyle Chayka, another journalist, wrote this great book on minimalism and just like how the aesthetics of certain like movements, I guess, on the internet reshape even our physical spaces. We mentioned the wing earlier. I mean, I think the wing was very like born of the internet and the sort of aesthetic. So I don't know. I would say that it does affect things a little bit. I'm curious, Walt, when you said that you looked into the internet and felt like it didn't really make much of a difference in the content creator world, what did you look like? Where were you looking?
Yeah. way to totally describe it as that, but this is a debate, so I'm going to describe it as that. So whenever you read a book, and I know that you experience this as well, you have to kind of figure out where the edges of this thing are. So for instance, I don't go into video games. Video games are incredible media, pop culture, transformative experiences that people spend an inordinate amount of time and money doing, that I have an enormous amount of respect for as a medium, and I did not have enough room to talk about them in that book as I appropriately would. Digital culture is on that liminal space, right? Because there's a lot of excellent creative narrative formats going on online, and there just wasn't enough space to kind of go into it. What I did kind of go into it, and one argument that I think that I want to make in favor of pop culture having some resonance here, is that, traditional media, television and movies, digital culture doesn't just happen sui generis. Digital culture doesn't just emerge entirely whole in and of itself. Oftentimes it does. Don't get me wrong, there's some incredible magic that can only happen in digital communities. But when I analyze just memes in general, verified memes from Know Your Memes, about 4,200 of them, right? About a third to 40% of them were directly just derived from some sort of traditional pop culture. It's a SpongeBob meme. It's from music videos, things like that. And so I think that we're all growing from the same turf here. And I would just argue that that turf is mainstream traditional pop culture.
But I think when you say you analyze memes, were those what type of meme? Were those the impact font memes? Because I agree with you, probably that's true when you think of those old school memes. But I don't know, I'm curious how you think TikTok has changed. Not to be asking other questions, Sarah, but how does
this was happening earlier if you're watching here. Didn't it just
we both like each other's work a lot, and we're very interested.
But I mean, I think of now these memes are just what a meme is so much more ephemeral, and so and I do think that there are sort of emergent memes, I guess, that do end up shaping things.
Okay, let me give you guys points to discuss.
Is this a pop culture, as Walter defines it, phenomenon, or a digital phenomenon, which is the Barbie movie? That had a lot of memes involved, that had a lot of internet involved, and yet it was a box office hit and would be considered traditional media. Where do you see it falling into your worlds?
Well, I mean, I feel that movie was such a phenomenon because of the impact that it had on the internet. The internet is what made it a success and a phenomenon. I mean, obviously, the marketing, that was a huge brand with huge IP and stuff, but the whole Barbenheimer meme, if you want to call it that, whatever, but that phenomenon, I do think was I think it actually showed the sort of symbiotic relationship that these two mediums have now, and I do think that they used to be internet sort of entertainment used to be sort of secondary, and now I think it's, also in the studio's interest to recognize that these are actually really powerful marketing engines. I guess I wouldn't call the Barbie movie itself an internet creation because it was sort of old IP that was rewritten into this incredible movie, but I don't think it would have been what it was and the phenomenon that it was without the internet and the content that was created around it. Would you agree?
I agree that the internet has some fingerprints on this, but I quibble with actually a lot of that. I think, there have been Barbie movies before. There's 19 of those things. They're cranked out cheap content in order to sell DVDs to 10-year-olds. And none of those were a hit. The reason that this was a hit was not because people, Oppenheimer boyfriend, Barbie girlfriend. The reason that this was a hit is that that's a damn good movie. Greta Gerwig did an incredibly good job. She had a specific vision for what to accomplish with that film. And through an incredibly talented cast and a remarkable production design.
And a gigantic marketing budget.
And a gigantic marketing budget.
That marketing budget, which played out on the internet. And also, yes, it was phenomenal. There's tons of phenomenal movies that aren't hits because they don't make an impact. They don't have the cultural impact.
Yeah, but I think that the fact that it was a hit is because it's a good movie. And I think that it's the film itself is the reason it's a hit. If Barbie sucked, it would not have made $1.2 billion. It would have had a big opening weekend, and that would have been a really funny counterpoint between Oppenheimer and Barbie, but it would have petered out. It's a good film, and that's why it's the biggest movie of the year. And my final point with this is that, we can talk about box office all that we want. We can talk about, what motivated that initial surge. The thing that's really interesting to me about Barbie is that Barbie was the kind of hit in countries that don't normally see female-driven work in general, and the effect of that was really remarkable. Barbie in the States, we're going to have a really fascinating Halloween. A bunch of millennials are going to break their ass because they're putting on roller skates for the first time. But in China, that movie made a bunch of money because there's never been a film that had that kind of unambiguous feminist message in a major cinema. And as a result, lots of people saw something that they hadn't seen before. And that's going to change that country, and that's going to change the people who saw it in a way that we don't necessarily appreciate yet. And that's what I'm getting at in my book.
I would love Taylor to talk about feminism actually, because that is a big theme that runs throughout what you found, that women are actually the definers of digital culture in a way that, in traditional media we may not get.
Yeah. Also, I agree with you, Walt, in the sense that like if the movie was not good, it wouldn't have traveled.
Yeah.
Like because you see that time and time again. But there are also bad movies that become huge hits because of the internet too. Yeah, I mean, my book talks a lot about the rise of the content creator industry, creator economy, which is what tech people like to call it now, which was 100% built by women, and I think it was actually the underestimation and the sort of like minimization of female culture, like women's entertainment and media, that led to kind of people dismissing it for so long, even just from like the beauty bloggers or the mommy bloggers, just like creating, content created for other women. And that did shape, I mean, not only did it birth transform the beauty industry and the fashion industry in so many material ways, like, the internet continues to shape that. But it also, I think, allowed a lot of women, I think women exerted a lot more influence on these tech platforms than they're given credit for as well, the female users.
Yeah, and I really like how your book is very much a counterpoint. We talk about this much, it's a very much a counterpoint to the idea that there was a deliberate strategy with these social media networks, that lots of this just happened because innovators scattered around the country from very different walks of life and with various different means of access to capital were able to do something really influential. And I will concede in a heartbeat that that is not traditional media. Traditional media requires access to capital, access to power. And the really cool thing that digital culture has been able to do has been able to really bring the ladder down a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I also think it's like, it has spurred phenomenon. Like you're talking about, that example of like the, whatever it's called. Oh my God, Hunger Games. Is that where they play the archery or whatever? I saw that so long ago that I've completely forgotten and blacked it out. But you constantly see these phenomena on the internet too, right? Like something takes off and everybody wants to do it. Or pickleball, I would say, is in part an internet phenomenon. Obviously, it's spurred by COVID, but you disagree?
I think it's an Ozempic phenomenon.
Okay, what about the strike? The strike happening in Hollywood right now is pretty much putting traditional Hollywood and TV on pause. What have you guys seen happen? And obviously this couldn't get into your books because it happened when you were about to publish them. But what have you seen change in the dynamic? Have we seen the rise you would have expected in digital content consumption, or are people just turning back to the same movies and TV shows? And I don't expect you guys to have the data, but what have you anecdotally noticed?
I'll take this one. I think that when you kind of we all work in digital publishing. Would you say that this is a really fun summer? Would you think that the traffic on the internet went up a great deal? Because I don't necessarily think that resembles my current content experience. What people did do is that they watched 100 million hours of Suits, and they
I'm on season 5 right now.
Oh my God! You are in. Did you know that she marries Prince Harry?
Shut up.
That's nuts. But so the thing that strikes that I always kind of come back to is that I have a bunch in my book about how early Hollywood formed, and this question of why is the movie industry in Hollywood? That's a peculiar place. The film technology was basically developed over the course of Europe, over the course of New Jersey, and over the course of a lot of different areas that are not Southern California. And the reason that you see America, first of all, and not Europe, where much of this technology was designed, emerge as a film capital, is that Europe experiences World War I, and all of a sudden there's no access to capital, because all the capital is going back to rebuild infrastructure. You've lost an entire generation of young people, and all of the discretionary spending that one would be spending is now going towards necessities, whereas in the States we emerged relatively unscathed. And so as a result, you were able to mess around with film technology. It became a speculative thing, not unlike Bitcoin or crypto or AI is now. People would launch on the New York Stock Exchange with film in the titles to get a little spike in the stock because it was a trendy, sexy technology at the time. And you ask yourself, why did it go to California? Well, that's where the money and that's where the concentration of talent was. And the idea is that talent from Britain left Britain because there wasn't work in Britain and went to work in California. And money from New York left New York to bring that money to California because there were a lot of talented people working. And all the craftsmen who went there began to learn from each other and teach each other and develop into these organizations. And the reason that I take us all the way back to that is that that's where the power of American Hollywood comes from. It is from the concentration of talented people operating in a single place, bouncing ideas off each other, developing new creative enterprises, and doing so. What the strikes are about is those talented people attempting to claim back their slice of the pie from corporate interests that are attempting to take it away from them. And so I thought that the decisions that some of the studio made were shooting themselves in the foot. Because really, if the country that had the most money had the best film industry, the Saudi Arabian would have the best film industry. If the country that had the most theaters had the best film industry.
But no one wants to see a movie with no women in it. Come on.
Not entirely wrong. I mean, there is 1917, but we can move on from that. The point being that, it's not deterministic of how big your market is or how big your money is or how many people act there. It's a concentration of talent. And what the strikes minimized and undermined was the ability to kind of tap into that talent. And I think that if there's anything that was lost, it's Hollywood ceding territory, if not online, to smaller creators who were not struck, but to international markets that were not struck.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with the international market part of it. I mean, I don't think that we've seen, and I talked to TikTok about that, were people more, turning to TikTok more during the strike, whatever, that was like a popular media narrative. I don't think it's hit yet. I don't think that gap in entertainment has played out at all. As you mentioned, it's still there. What I will say is that entire talent pool definitely turned to the internet, and it has generated huge audiences online. I mean, now TV writers, for instance, have hundreds of thousands of followers. They've developed their own kind of internet audiences. And I do think that and I think it really started to happen actually during COVID, but the strike accelerated it, where you had 2020, you had suddenly a lot of people out of work starting to go on the internet, and then when the strike hit, they went full throttle. And so you have so many more people in Hollywood, traditional people that always sort of probably in the past would have not gone into the internet thinking of it's like a secondary form of entertainment, now completely enmeshed in it. And I do think that that's changed a lot of the power dynamics, especially among talent.
It was also interesting to see, just piggybacking off of that, the creators that didn't take advantage of the moment as much as they could have, because they eventually wanted to be.
Oh, that was all of them.
Yeah,
which is so crazy.
Real
to me.
actors,
it's so crazy to me. These are two groups that had so much hostility towards each other. The whole primary sort of way that YouTubers have always felt about traditional entertainment was fuck those people. It was always there was so much hostility between those groups, and I think the pandemic and this new generation of younger people, writers and actors and stuff that are Gen Z that just don't make those distinctions, there was complete solidarity. And also I think SAG did a ton of work. I mean, I wrote about this, but SAG also used this. They rolled out their influencer agreement in 2021. Podcasters, content creators can join. They really circled the wagons when strike happened and used it to recruit a ton of influencers.
There's a very funny argument that I'm going to make that hurts both of our cases. And the thing is that the very funny thing about the past 2 or 3 years is that all of the movie stars want to make a podcast now because they all want the smartless deal, and they want to be Reese Witherspoon, or they all want, they all just want to get that TikTok following and then make that sweet book deal money. And all of the influencers still want to be movie stars, and they're still waiting to do that, and will absolutely obey any strike that will potentially allow them to do that in the future. And so it's just so funny that the grass is always greener.
Yes, they want to join SAG. I think they don't necessarily want to make their career movie stars, but they don't want to cut themselves off from any kind of branding opportunity. Speaking of that, I saw, who's the guy in Cruel Intentions? The guy that was married,
Ryan Phillippe.
Ryan Phillippe. Okay, I ran into Ryan Phillippe at a party recently. It was a very LA story. And I was like, this guy looks familiar. Where do I know him from? But he's so much older now. He introduced himself as a podcaster. And
Incredible.
I thought that was hilarious.
Incredible.
Because I was like, wow, okay. I mean, like you said, I think they all, the podcast thing is so interesting too, because I think it's so dominated by celebrities talking to other celebrities.
I understand wanting to diversify. I also understand the DTC element. There's a lot of business reasons that they do that. It is just, it's a funny thing that does undermine our cases both a little bit, that each team wants to be on the other for a little bit, but I don't know.
I think entertainers.
Doesn't it just say everyone wants to profit maximize?
Yeah,
Probably.
and I think also entertainers are open. I mean, I talked to Paul Scheer a lot, who is a comedian and has a web show, has done tons of TV. There's a lot of people like that that are kind of they're
multi-purpose. They have a
multi-purpose
brand,
talent, right? They'll make money however they can, which is how a lot of people in Hollywood have always done it. There's just more revenue opportunities now on the internet, so you don't have to do the waitressing job or whatever.
Okay, everyone, think of your questions while you're listening, and then
We can open it up. Okay, David.
Yeah, you know my question. Okay, so Donald Trump, master of social media, somehow became president, right? Despite the fact that, if there was no social media, would he have become president?
Donald Trump, the NBC star, the one who was on television for about 14 years.
Ooh, oh yeah.
Do you mean that Donald?
Yeah,
you mean
but
Donald Trump from Home Alone 2? Do you mean is that the Donald Trump that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Do you mean the Donald Trump, the notorious media guy who always chased down any opportunity to be in old media? I think that again, there's blood on everyone's hands in this situation, and I think obviously there's Twitter opportunity is a way to bolster it, but I think that Donald Trump is a television star through and through. He's got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It's got a little television.
He's a television star that was able to leverage the internet for political power. There's a reason why when he was sworn in that night at the Hilton, he was surrounded by YouTubers. That whole room was full of YouTubers and content creators. And I think he's somebody. I think he's an example of a talent that truly he could play in both, because he was also so good at manipulating cable news, and I think that swung a lot of boomers towards his favor. But that whole movement and that whole, I talk about this, I don't get into it super deep in my book, but I write about it a lot, is the way that the right-wing media ecosystem is completely enmeshed in the content creator industry and influencer industry in a way that the mainstream media is not at all.
Yeah, can I ask about? That's my words. Okay, dead. All right.
I've been silenced.
Censored.
I want to ask about the issue with, that my situation may have tripped my brain a little bit, but making sure that we understand how this is going to evolve. Do you think that you see in the future more cross-pollination? Do you think that there's something that really surprised you about for a lot of your creators, they see this as legitimacy. For a lot of those creators, you see that as impact, right? If you do something great in film and it goes big on the internet, is this line just going to be blurred going forward?
Well, yeah, I would argue it's completely blurred. I do think that the internet is the default kind of world that we all live in now, and so I think that for television to have the level of impact that it wants to have, it has to make its mark on the internet to have that reach and impact. I don't think that traditional television, Walter has convinced me, has given me a newfound respect for a lot of traditional, because there are so many interesting examples in his book that I'm wow, that was kind of more impactful than I thought. But I just think that it's all going to get more and more enmeshed, and that the internet is going to be our default form of media and entertainment for the future.
Yeah, so there's two things here. One is that I absolutely think that digital culture is getting to the point where it is becoming very competitive with traditional pop culture. I still think that it's not quite there yet, but I think it's genuinely a matter. It's not if, it's when. And the things that I hit on in the book that were demonstrably evidence that these things can have an effect on the world, but one of my favorite ones, the easiest one to convince people of, is after The Lord of the Rings comes out, all of a sudden, a lot of people from North America and England and places that are rather far from New Zealand book flights to go to New Zealand. And then it starts going down a little bit again. And then New Zealand's fuck. And then they make the Hobbit movies and it goes back up again. And so literally you were able to see the production of this film franchise directly lead hundreds of thousands of people to go to a vacation on the other side of the world.
But isn't that what Instagram does?
That's what I'm about to say. I am conceding the point. Oh man, we're coming to a place where we're seeing eye to eye on some stuff in this debate. But that's exactly what Instagram is. Y'all have lovely flowers out here that I understand people trample all the time whenever a super bloom happens because it looks great on Instagram. It is there are absolutely motivations for that kind of thing. And once you start seeing these individual small ones, they do aggregate into bigger ones. Obviously, a fun thing about this conversation is that we're talking about digital culture, we're talking about pop culture, and then there's a secret third debater over here who represents gaming. And they're beating us on money and time spent and everything. Because if you look, I read a little bit in the book on how the Pentagon tries to influence movies. And I have no doubt in my mind that the Pentagon tries to influence social media. But at the same time, when it comes to video games, that is already a direct relationship. The Pentagon made a video game, damn it. They gave it to me at the Boy Scout Jamboree in 2005. Like, this is absolutely any way that influence can kind of happen, whether it's through pop culture, digital culture, or any other kind of element. Like, the people are going to pursue that. And I think that as digital culture really continues to bear out, it's going to become very, very emergent and very, very obvious the effect that it has. And I guess the last thing I want to say is more kudos to digital culture is like, we've talked a little bit about how new genres, new formats, and new creative outlets can happen. And I was telling you my favorite thing to watch these days. There's this company Dropout, and they have this entire franchise of Dimension 20, and there's an entire genre of podcast right now of basically actual play D&D. That would never have happened 15 years ago when there were only a couple networks and HBO. Like, that is the exact kind of phenomenon that can succeed from social media, from social followings, from dedicated fandom followings that can coalesce on the internet. And then you get, the Legends of Vox Machina become a big hit animated show. And so, like, I absolutely see digital platforms, becoming in many ways the traditional media platforms, and it's that innovation that's going to get them there.
Taylor, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the gatekeeping that Hollywood and TV does, and how the folks that you were able to talk to for this book, you talked to Taylor, everyone who's famous on the internet, almost everyone, were able to defy all odds and break through into the mainstream.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think that's Hollywood is entertainment, the media world is like this filtering mechanism that is optimizing for a very specific lucrative audience. And so these niche kind of content creators that would never get a shot, especially women, especially just people from all different sorts of backgrounds that like you mentioned the Dungeons and Dragons, like they're catering to these niche things, they're never gonna have mass market appeal, are able to circumvent gatekeepers time and time again. Obviously it starts with blogs, it goes through to like YouTubers and TikTokers and all that. I do think now that especially with the rise of streaming platforms and just the amount of content that they need to fill, that there's more they look to the internet a lot, and I think they develop kind of little short series, or they just have there's a lot more content on the internet today that I do think Hollywood is constantly trying to take advantage of the internet because they recognize it's the most powerful marketing tool. And I mean, what my book argues too is that online influence as sort of currency is the most important currency you can have today, because you can use it to do anything. You can use it to become president, you can use it to make your movie a hit. Anything. So I think there's a lot more interplay, and I agree. I think these worlds are merging, and certainly, I mean, I have a newfound respect for that industry. Being in LA and meeting more traditional people, I think they're a little bit more with it than I give them credit for. Sorry about that noise.
And then, do you think one thing that I keep hearing when I talk to creators when I try to understand this mass market culture effects, as I did for my own book, the thing I kept running into is no one has a shared culture anymore. We're getting to this world where we all just have niche culture. We all have different parasocial relationships with different celebrities, and my celebrity might not be the same as your celebrity. Is that our future? I guess, does digital become more mainstream? Does Hollywood figure out how to be more niche? How does this play out?
Yes, I think that the future is a very is a very distributed media model, and I don't think that we're going to have the level of mass fame, or it will exist. It's Mr. Beast. It's certain people do achieve that peak level of influence, but I think it's much more rare. I don't think that we're going to have the same. I think there's going to be bundling and unbundling, but there's never going to be that there's only 5 channels on TV again. Obviously, what do you think, Walter?
Yeah, I also, the one thing I do want to revise a little bit is that I think that there could be a romanticization of the monoculture a little bit, and and just frankly, I think that era was before anyone up here was born. I think that if there's a time that there were only 3 networks and Cheers was the most watched show in America, none of us were alive when that happened. So
yeah, sure, but we were alive in the 2000s when it was still the media hasn't. It was still pretty much more of a monoculture even 15 years ago. Would you say?
I don't think I would say. I think that, again, there's a lot of there's always been niche fandoms, there's always been niche artists, there's always been niche comedians, there's always been niche shows. I think that even early days of HBO, that was a niche. If you looked at the viewership of early Sopranos, that's a niche. right? I think that there's always been willing to be people playing in niches. Even if you go back to like the 70s in film, like
But
the
they
new
couldn't survive, right? How were they monetizing back then, and how were they reaching their disparate audiences?
paid subscribers, which by the way, thank you so much Substack for hosting us at this event. Let's give it up for Substack. We'll plug them more at the end. But in terms of the subscriber-supported ecosystem that can facilitate artistic content, HBO in the 90s and Substack in the audiences, right? But yeah, again, like I think that again, there's always been lacks of money. There's always been niche audiences, niche crowds, and those are the laboratories that create mainstream culture. Like if you looked at the directors who were, shooting on shoestring budgets and releasing their films in porno theaters, they became Martin Scorsese, who's got the biggest movie in America coming out this weekend. And as a result, you got there's always going to be development back and forth, and there's always going to be innovation and not enough money in the right places, but it finds a way.
Yeah, I guess I do think that it was hard, and just based off the people that I talked to in my book, like people like Adam Bader, who did the Chocolate Rain video or whatever, who was a musician. He tried for very long, to reach people, and I do think that the internet allows these small niche people to reach people at a scale that is hard to do previously. And I know there's been zines and stuff, but it's even true with the media. I mean, I think did you start as a blogger too, or?
Yeah, basically.
I mean, I think some of us, I started as a blogger for sure, and there's a lot more room today. There's a lot more content being made, and there's just a lot more opportunity, I think, to go around because we're drowning in content.
I mean, I think my favorite thing about the past couple of years has been, and this is both the digital culture phenomenon as well as the Hollywood phenomenon. And we should ask more questions. Got some big ones. But the barrier to entry lowering, whether that's because technology gets cheaper to access and cheaper to rent, and people are able to shoot what they want on a budget, whether it's the distribution mechanism through any different number of online digital things where you're able to fundraise ahead of time, or you're able to distribute to your fans or develop a fan base and then sell it to them. I think that we are in a very, very exciting time for that kind of bootstrap shoestring culture that can come out with the next generation of, I imagine, mainstream stuff.
Should we ask anybody else have any other questions? I saw another hand.
Hi. Okay, so we're talking about digital versus traditional media and how it influences us, right? How do you think that differs across generations, like Gen Z, Gen Alpha versus millennials and Gen X? Do kids still care about social media?
The question is, how does that affect across different generations? The traditional media versus digital media.
And do the kids still even care?
Do the kids even care? I mean, listen, the Paw Patrol movie did about $8 million. I was like, I think the kids care.
I think it's more. I think it's less. I think that at least the content creators that I spoke to, again, it's this new generation of Hollywood people that don't make the same distinction, or they're not viewing their web series as inherently less than, or there's not that chip on their shoulder almost. And I actually feel like that even in media. I'm sure you remember when people would say she's a digital journalist or a digital reporter. It was this sort of secondary thing, and now nobody makes those distinctions.
So there's an element of digital culture that I cover in the book that I think really hits on this super well, and it is fan fiction. And I spoke to researchers who actually just study fan fiction, who the people who make it are, who are again traditionally young, skew women, and what the effect that has on them is. And the idea is that fan fiction is really remarkable because it's a thing that you care about very, very deeply. It is an existing piece of media property, and it is an individual writing their own stories within that shared universe completely unofficially. I would argue that it's just a very basic definition of fan fiction. And fan fiction is one of the most pervasive and successful and popular mediums on the internet. It is one of the few places on the internet where you have a genuine community that supports one another and encourages one another to keep writing and edits one another. And effectively what these researchers found was that people who wrote fan fiction significantly increased their writing ability at a speed that you typically only see in jumping grades. And as a result, because they cared so much about this pop culture thing, this pop culture phenomenon, it could have been Sherlock, it could have been any different number of things, but because they were so motivated by their love of a movie or a show, they were able to create in and of themselves and join and just inform a distributed mentorship through this online community. And I think that's just such a perfect thing, because I think that, again, the minute that you start lowering the stakes and creating art, that's when you start to really grow from it. And so, to kind of just tie it all together, it's let's not fool ourselves that pop culture doesn't mean anything to the kids. I think that if you go on AO3 or fanfiction.net right now, you will have a very rude awakening of the nature of how important cultures to a lot of kids. And the idea is that they're being motivated to become creators in and of themselves, obviously through a non-monetized medium, but they're growing so much as a result.
Next question. I took over as moderator.
Who has another question? In the back, Danilo.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, how much of that gatekeeping can be traditional media realistically advertisers not knowing what to do with influencers? Like you have these traditional media companies, kind of like United or Coca-Cola, that were like champions of being really great commercial makers, and now you have like Duolingo, just kind of being the online advertising like innovator in that space.
Yeah, so the question for folks who couldn't necessarily hear is again, summarizing very briefly and potentially messing it up, is how much of this has to do with the fact that advertisers don't know what to do with influencers like they used to know what to do with figures of notoriety. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Cool. The next one?
I'm curious about your answer to this.
Yeah, I think that advertisers, this is more of a general statement, but I think that advertising supported art a lot of the times isn't necessarily the good thing about advertisements and things like music videos is that they give people an opportunity to cut their teeth with a big budget. If you looked at, David Fincher, if you looked at Jonathan Demme, you're talking about directors, Catherine Bigelow, I believe too. You're looking at directors who really cut their teeth shooting music videos. And music videos are cool because they're short, they require a distinct vision, and you have a bunch of money from the music business to make them. And so they're an opportunity for a fresh start or a film student or somebody who's, you can take a risk on to genuinely get their eye on the ball. And I would argue that I think for a lot of reasons, media, like mainstream media, has been very much dropping that ball. I think that the talent development pipeline is rather bad. I think that, there are the typical frustrations of things like nepotism. There's the typical frustrations of, certain people get jobs and other people don't. And a lot of the time that is based on their background. And I think that what we kind of saw a lot during the strikes was fundamental to dissatisfaction with that and an urge to fix it. Whether or not they succeeded, I think we have a few years to figure out. But I think that there is one thing that's clear is that market forces are increasingly pushing mainstream media towards, making sure that they have a pipeline in. And my hope is that it works. I don't know if it will, but I hope that they made their voices known.
Yeah, I do think advertisers kind of know what to do with influencer. I mean, I think they leverage them for marketing. I think content creators generally, at least in the past few years, a lot of them soured on advertisers and they want to create their own brands. And so that's why you see this more like entrepreneur model emerging.
Yeah, it seems I love this, the entrepreneurial element of it's not I want to shill for this makeup company. It's I'm going to make a makeup company that gets bought by that company, and I love that.
Yeah, which is so interesting. I talked to this business school professor just about the influencer industry, and he was just saying how it's really shifted the business model where it used to be that you develop a product and then you market that product, and now the influencer world has really shifted where it's you develop the audience first always, and then you market whatever sort of products that feed that audience. So that was interesting.
One question? In the meeting?
Hi, where do you see the overall economy of media going? Especially when you have Netflix and streaming content kind of collapsing, and then obviously where you have subscription fatigue, whether it's Substack, for example, or more traditional media. Where do you see the economy going?
So the broader question is where do you see the economy going with this? And you alluded to Netflix as a phenomenon potentially lowering the interest in overall content consumption as well as organizational potential for subscription fatigue. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
You want to take it right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that subscription fatigue is a real issue in the creator world. You can't subscribe to everyone at the same time. But I do think again it goes back to that diversification of revenue models, where I think a lot of content creators understand that they can't look. Subscriptions are one part, live events are some parts. I mean, doing these sort of interesting brand deals, licensing. There's just so many more ways to make money on the internet now that I don't think that one of those going away or one of those declining or flatlining is gonna, crater at least the creator economy. I don't know as much about Netflix, but I think the whole streaming thing is interesting. I don't know, you might know more about that.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the kind of broader economics of the industry. And there's a few things I don't really get into too much of the day-to-day business element of it in my book. There's one thing that I will say, which is that I think that there's this mentality that people have that Hollywood is entirely motivated by profit. And that is not true, I would argue. I think that the primary motivation is not to make money in Hollywood. The primary motivation is to not lose money. It's a risk aversion. Nobody ever lost their job by coming out with a movie that made its budget back, right? People lose their job when you take a big weird swing and then you only make $20 million. And so as a result, I think that there's a culture within a lot of traditional media that it has become very conservative. That's why you're seeing reboots a lot. It's why you're seeing franchises be heavily emphasized. It's why you're seeing a dollar that could go towards an interesting young filmmaker instead go towards a splashy thing. And I think that that's going to be a long-term vulnerability. And the fun thing about that, though, and this is the fun thing about the market in general, is that like people will find out about that and they will exploit that, and somebody's going to beat them, and potentially that person's going to get bought one day. A good example that we've seen recently is A24. A24 realized, you know what? Every dollar that you spend on a horror movie, you make $30 back. It's weird, but it just happens like that. And so we're going to do that, and then we're going to fund innovative work by young directors, and then we're going to make that happen. And now they just sold this PE thing. Congratulations, they made a successful business. But you're going to see people identify those kind of idiosyncrasies in the market and exploit them. And so the people who run the show are not going to run the show forever. So they're going to face competition someday, and I think it's increasingly going to come from your side.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
We are coming up on time, so this might have to be the last one.
Kind of time with the recent person, because you mentioned times like the whole talent concentration being a critical factor to create and sustain such of the future.
Yeah.
How do you see that going? Given that racial relationship with Hollywood, it's also at the same time a lot of content creators popping up everywhere and taking their own spin on things.
So yeah, the question is, again, I alluded earlier to one of the things that made Hollywood is that they had a concentration of talent, and that's an important thing. And how do we see this kind of moving forward? I will say one thing and throw it to you, because I think that there's a ton of examples of innovation in digital media around this, but I think that there's a reason that the next phase after a person becomes somewhat notorious on YouTube is that they join a house or an organ or a group of people. Am I wrong?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's you have to have, really on the come up, that collaborative group. I think it's young creative people have always wanted to work together and live together and use each other as springboards and kind of boost each other. I think it's also notable that it's less and less about LA. It used to be that you get to be a famous influencer. It was very, very weighted towards LA and maybe secondarily New York. And places like Atlanta that are big, these are still the main entertainment hubs are the main influencer hubs. I think for these reasons, that's where the agents are, that's where the managers are, that's where other freelance videographers and people like that are. But I do think there's a lot more online collaboration. I did a story recently where I went to Greenville because I think Mr. Beast has created this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
This story's wild.
Yeah. It's not out yet, but it should be. I did it months ago, but it's coming. But anyway, I wrote about sort of the economic impact actually that it's had on Greenville. And one thing that people said is that it's brought so many more content creators to the area where now they're opening this YouTube space in Raleigh because all of these content creators just want that adjacency to somebody that has the talent. So yeah, I think it's.
Yeah, and again, that's what happened in early Hollywood. All of a sudden, there's a few studios that start developing money, and people want to hang out near them. People decide to leave England, where you're having at best to deal with quota quickies so that they can get something on the screen that's British. Or you can go to America, and you can be on the biggest set in the world and have the best camera in the world, shot by the best guy in the world. And so you see these kind of agglomerations of talent pop up, and I think the fact that this keeps on happening with digital media just kind of, I think it speaks to the nature of creativity, where it's not a solo pursuit. It's very much a group project, and people grow by being around other people who can make them grow.
Okay, and the final question, or final thing for both of you guys to talk about, which is how do we best support your work, your book? Where can we find you? How can we buy it? Taylor, you want to go first? Your book's already out.
Great question. My book is already out, so you can get it right now. Please get it everywhere. You can go to extremelyonlinebook.com. It's also on Amazon. Also follow me on TikTok and YouTube and everywhere else. I'm just at Taylor Lorenz. And send me story ideas if there's ever anything that you think I should write about. I love hearing from people.
I'm going to divert from answering that question briefly and be you should definitely buy her book. It's really good.
Well, likewise, by the way. Walter's book is amazing.
Thank you. But you are really the only person who could have written that book. It is just such a phenomenal work. It is such a piece of an era that I think is a perspective that needs to be absolutely seen. Speaking of which, No Filter by Sarah Frier is also a very good book that also covers a lot of the intersection of this. Again, one of my favorite stories in that is how one of the biggest moments for Twitter in their history was at the Oscars with that Ellen selfie and that kind of stuff. I don't know, I just really dig that. And then, so my book is out next Tuesday. I've got some prints over there that if you show me that you pre-ordered it, I will sign and give you a cool little print. There's a ton of charts in this book, and it is one of my favorite ones from the book. I also write a newsletter on Substack called Numlock. It is Numlock News. I've been doing it for about 5 years now. And it's all about fascinating numbers in the news. If by any chance there's any Numlock readers here or any potential future ones, I brought a bunch of stickers with me, and so you can leave with some cool swag from that. But thanks again, Substack, for having us. This is really cool.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Substack, for hosting and for all those nice bites and drinks. I think there's more to have if you are still around. And I think no matter how you come away from this debate feeling about digital media or Hollywood, I think it's safe to say from my perspective that both of these reporters have made it.